everyone, welcome to Insulin and Thyroid class. Tonight we're going to talk about insulin and thyroid. And I'm going to start by just opening up with a little bit about insulin. And feel free to cut in with questions if you want, no problem. We have an audience. Insulin is the sugar storage hormone. And the interesting thing about insulin is that it comes from a little gland in the digestive area called the pancreas. Most people have heard of insulin as far as diabetics or getting diabetic shots, that sort of thing. And the pancreas has a duct that goes into the intestines, where you absorb and digest your food. So the pancreas has two functions. It has digestive enzymes and it makes insulin. So when we talk about leaky gut and absorption issues in the intestine, we talk about the digestive enzymes coming in here into the intestines to break down food. But the other function is insulin is secreted, and insulin is secreted in response to blood sugar. These are just little sugar molecules. And so if you have a lot of sugar in the system and you eat sugar a lot, insulin is secreted to lower the blood sugar. So where does the blood sugar go? It goes into the cells. And depending on whether this is a fat cell or a muscle cell, depends on how you train the body. If every time you eat a lot of sugar, insulin is secreted to lower the blood sugar, to remove the sugar. Sugar is toxic to the bloodstream. That's why diabetics start to get neuropathy and problems with their eyes, retinopathy, all those problems. If you let sugar sit in here too long, it'll start eating away the walls of the blood vessel. And I guess I should back up just a little bit because I'm sitting here talking about the intestines, because basically the sugar goes into the bloodstream. So the pancreas secretes insulin in response to sugar in the blood here. So whether it goes onto the fat cell or into the muscle cell depends on how you train the body. If every time you eat sugar you sit around, then the body says, oh, they're not going to use that sugar immediately, so it'll put it into a fat cell. And that's the worst thing you can do. Like if you have a pie after Thanksgiving, you eat the sugar and it's going to go to fat. But if you get up and move around after you eat sugar or carbohydrates, the body will say, oh, they're going to use that for immediate fuel, for immediate energy, so we're going to put it into the muscle cells. So that's one of the main things that you can do, is if you are going to have some sugar, get up and get moving. That's running. So you want to get moving after you eat sugar. Well, over time, if you have a lot of sugar, maybe you drink too many sodas, which is one of my biggest pet peeves with the soda industry, is it's a huge amount of sugar. And in fact, I used to have this little glass thing. Miss Loretta, you've probably seen me carry that glass thing around from Hobby Lobby. It's about this big, and it's full about that much of sugar. And every time you drink like a big gulp from the Speedy Mart or whatever, it's about that much sugar. It's an amazing amount of sugar. We were never meant to drink our sugar or drink our calories for that matter. And what happens is if you have a lot of sugar, over time insulin keeps getting secreted to lower the blood sugar. And what happens is it stops working well and it becomes resistant. And so when you think about the analogy of a key in a lock, genetically you might have a rusty key or a rusty lock, which makes you predisposed to diabetes, which means the receptors for the insulin in the blood into the cell don't work well. And so what happens is that if this sugar tries to go into the cell, the resistance means that there's a block here on the receptors, and so it can't go in, so the sugar remains high. So for a while, people will actually have low blood sugar because when the insulin's lowered, the insulin will be high. So a lot of doctors only check a glucose level. But it takes a long time for you to get enough insulin resistance to actually develop diabetes. And so I think of diabetes as a verb, not a noun, because you're diabetesing. When the insulin's not working properly, then after time, it stops trying altogether. And so the little picture that you have in your book is of the key in the lock not working well, and so the key doesn't open the lock well anymore. And then the sugar can't go in here, and then the sugar stays high. And the next thing you know is most doctors will try to put you on insulin. But that's the worst thing that you can do, because insulin actually causes you to store more sugar and usually the fat cells, because the doctors don't educate people that they need to get moving. So rather than check a glucose level, I recommend that you check an insulin level. And if you're truly fasting, meaning nothing to eat for 4 to 6 hours, it should be less than 10. And if it's more than 10, that means that you've got too much insulin being pumped out all the time. And at that point, we start to talk about, well, what do we do about that? Well, lifestyle changes, of course. So if we eliminate the sugar that we're putting in, then we decrease the work that insulin has to do. But there's a couple of different things that we can do. If the insulin is more than 10. So if the insulin is greater than 10, we can think of a couple things. One of them is we can put you on a supplement called chromium. And you've probably heard of picolinate. And this is just a chelator that allows the chromium to get absorbed into the cells. And sometimes they'll use picolinate or picolinate, which is a niacin molecule. Usually we use the picolinate, and we usually use about 200 micrograms with each meal. And that helps your insulin be more sensitive. Helps that lock in that key work a little bit better. If your insulin's greater than 20, we usually talk about using a pharmaceutical, and I don't use many pharmaceuticals, but this is one. It's an old generic. It's on the $4 plan at Walmart, dirt cheap. And what it does is it increases the insulin sensitivity, and it decreases the absorption of sugar. But one thing that I will say, the place that it decreases the absorption, here's the stomach, and here's the intestine. The area that it does this in is also the area where you absorb most of your B12. So if you're decreasing absorption of sugar, basically to send the sugar out through the tract so it doesn't get absorbed, you're also going to affect your B12. And so anytime we use metformin for a short while, usually they tell people to use a sublingual form or a B12 shot. And that bypasses the intestines for absorption. And so that really allows us to get the B12 in if they're not absorbing well. And I will skip over here and just say that within the cell, if this were a cell, and here's the nucleus, here's the DNA in the cell. In the cell's DNA is something called AMPK, and AMPK acts like a spark plug or a pilot light. There's a little flame there. Pilot light to, like in the water heater, that kind of thing, or to your gas. And when the pilot light goes out on your metabolism, you gain weight and you have all sorts of metabolic problems. So metformin is one thing that can light the pilot light and increase your metabolism. And we're going to talk about thyroid here in just a minute. Thyroid also does this. So metformin can do this, and thyroid hormone can do this. So two things that can really affect the metabolism. So a lot of times if somebody's overweight and their insulin level is not real elevated, but they are having problems with low blood sugar, and the symptoms of low blood sugar, when you eat a lot of sugar, within 30 minutes to an hour, you start getting shaky and weak and headache or tired. If you get those symptoms, when you can get those from your food sensitivities too, but insulin and too much insulin, low blood sugar can definitely trigger all of those symptoms. So for a time, sometimes just for weight loss or to increase the metabolism, to fire up the AMPK or the spark plug or the pilot light, we'll use metformin and we'll use a little low-dose thyroid. So using metformin is almost like treating prediabetes, and you can think of thyroid like treating pre-thyroid conditions as well. And then lifestyle change is the biggest thing. And this is a hard one because sugar acts like cocaine or morphine in the brain. It triggers the dopamine receptors, and it also triggers you to make a hormone called oxytocin, which is a happy, feel-good hormone. So every time you eat a lot of sugar, it can help with oxytocin levels, but the problem with that is eating a lot of sugar, trying to up your dopamine or up your oxytocin levels over time is really hard on the insulin or the pancreas process, so you don't want to do that. So lifestyle change basically is to decrease the sugar in your diet. And usually we try to keep that to 25 grams a day or less if we're trying to help insulin resistance. Makes sense? You good? You with me? Okay. Any questions about insulin there, since you kind of got the book open? Okay. So insulin and thyroid are both very closely related because, again, insulin goes into the DNA, just like metformin can go into the DNA and increase your insulin sensitivity and increase your AMPK. Thyroid can go into the DNA as well. So both of these hormones are very similar to each other, and thyroid is the little gland in the neck. That's a big gland. That'd probably be like a goiter. A goiter is just an enlarged thyroid. And then there's also hormones in the brain from the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. And so most doctors will check something called a TSH, which is a hormone from the brain. It's not even an actual thyroid hormone. And the reason they do that is because there's a feedback mechanism that happens with the thyroid. And when the thyroid is low, or not making enough thyroid hormone, it goes to the brain and the TSH is pumped out, thyroid stimulating hormone to stimulate to make more thyroid, and vice versa. So when the thyroid is too high, the TSH will kick back and say, stop making so much thyroid. And the way thyroid conversion happens is T4 has to be converted to T3. This is the inactive form, and this is the active form. And the reason it's called T4 and T3 is because if we were to actually draw out the thyroid molecule, T4 has 4 iodine molecules on it. And T3, what happens is you remove one of these iodine molecules to make it the active form. So you have to have iodine as substrate into the thyroid gland to make the T4, and then you have to have an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase to convert it. And this is significant because if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition, autoimmune disorders start in the gut from leaky gut, food sensitivities, and things like gluten that cause a trigger of something called zonulin that causes specific inflammation that affects this thyroid peroxidase. And so if you block out this thyroid peroxidase, or you have an autoimmune condition that attacks this thyroid peroxidase, you can't convert your active form to your inactive form. You can't pull off that iodine molecule. And the problem is that the synthetic form of thyroid that most doctors use is called Synthroid, and it is a synthetic inactive form. And so you can have this feedback happening with the brain all day long, and the doctor can check a TSH and tell you, oh, the Synthroid is working, but there is no information about whether it's actually converting to the active form or not. So they'll tell you all day long it looks like your Synthroid's working, but people that still have hair falling out, they're still feeling tired, they're still gaining weight, and they're like, why? I don't understand, and that's why. So when we give people thyroid, even for a short term, just to maybe fire up the pilot light, so to say, the AMPK, what we do is either give them the active form of T3, or we give them a combination of a natural thyroid called Armour thyroid. And people instantly feel better because they get the T3. Now you can give somebody iodine, but iodine's only going to help you make the inactive form. You still have to have thyroid peroxidase working accurately to convert to your active form for the thyroid to actually work properly in the tissues and help the metabolism work and everything balance out. And you can actually check an actual T4 level and actual T3 level, and you can check TSH, but I say one test is no test. If you're just checking a TSH, you know nothing about your conversion from your active form to your inactive form. So that's kind of thyroid in a nutshell. And do you have any questions? Good. Okay, thank you.